You ever click on something you know is a bad idea, but your life's such a mess you do it anyway? Yeah, that was me. A random nanny job online. 6 grand a week. What could go wrong? Turns out, everything. And also, everything I needed. 20 hours later my phone rang, an unknown number from New York. The voice on the line was female-clipped and vaguely European. Miss Petrova, this is regarding your application for the nanny position. Mr. Greco would like to meet with you in person. Are you available tomorrow at 9 a.m.? A chill licked the back of my neck. I never submitted my phone number, just an encrypted email in the form. How did you? We run comprehensive background assessments on potential hires. It's standard for the safety of the child. Her tone made it clear that questioning it was futile. A car will arrive at 7:30 sharp. Please be ready and professionally dressed. Good day, Miss Petrova. She hung up before I could respond. That night, I tried to research Greco family Manhattan, but all I found were outdated restaurant chains and funeral homes. There was no website, no images, no job description posted anywhere anymore, just a line on my browser history and a folder full of doubts. But $6,000 a week wasn't something I could afford. To ignore 1 month of that would clear my rent debt. 3 months could pay off my legal bills, and 5 would give me enough savings to finally start over in a city that had done nothing but chew me up. So the next morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., a matte black SUV pulled up outside my building. The driver didn't speak, just stepped out in a black suit and nodded. Miss Petrova. I nodded, gripping the tote bag with my printed resume and a secondhand navy blazer I hadn't worn since the hearing. Please, he opened the door. The ride was silent, but smooth, weaving through city traffic like we were ghosts, untouchable, untouching. We pulled into the Upper East Side through an iron gate and stopped before a townhouse so immaculate it looked airbrushed. The driver simply said, "4th floor, ring the bell. A woman named Mrs. Antonelli will meet you." I stood in front of a massive wooden door taller than any I'd ever seen. It had brass hardware that gleamed like gold and a small camera tucked beneath a stone arch. I pressed the bell. A musical chime echoed inside. The woman who answered was Italian, late 50s, with stern eyes and hair in a chignon, her expression unreadable. "Miss Petrova, I'm Mrs. Antonelli, the housekeeper and household manager. This way, please." We stepped into the kind of interior I'd only seen in design magazines: travertine tile, silk drapes, oil paintings. I shouldn't have been surprised when we bypassed the elevator and took the stairs up 3 full flights, stopping at a pair of double doors so tall they looked like castle gates. She knocked once. "Enter," came the voice from inside. I stepped in and froze. It was less of an office and more of a command center. Walls of dark oak, shelves with first editions, a roaring fireplace, and behind a desk that could seat 5 people sat the man who would change everything. Attilio Greco, tall, composed, a custom yellow shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing tattoos that snaked up his forearms. His hair was slicked back, sharp jaw, dark eyes like polished obsidian, and when he looked up at me, it felt like the air shifted. "Miss Petrova," he said, standing slowly and extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." I hadn't even sat down yet, and I already knew this wasn't just a job interview. This was an evaluation, and every second of silence that passed in Attilio Greco's study felt like a calculation. He watched me like someone used to seeing through masks, but not always interested in calling them out. When he finally gestured to the chair across from him, I sat carefully, aware of the way my heels clicked against marble floors, as if the room itself was listening. The interview was brief. He barely glanced at my resume and didn't ask for references. He already knew everything. Mrs. Antonelli reappeared without being summoned, which told me that even the walls obeyed someone in this house. She handed me a folder with a contract and a schedule printed on cream-colored cardstock, the font elegant, almost bridal. Attilio spoke once more, this time with finality. "You'll start tomorrow. Your suite is on the 3rd floor, west wing. Mrs. Antonelli will show you." The contract wasn't a suggestion. It was a command sealed in paper. The hallway stretched longer than expected, lined with abstract art that looked expensive and oddly placed, like someone tried to make the space look less like a fortress and more like a home. Mrs. Antonelli walked with her hands clasped behind her back, her heels silent on the hardwood, like she'd been trained not to make noise. "Your suite," she announced, stopping before a thick white door with a brushed brass handle. When I stepped inside, my breath caught. This wasn't just a room. It was an apartment. It was bigger than my last 2 places combined. There was a sitting room with a cream velvet couch and a fireplace I couldn't imagine ever using. A kitchenette with matte black fixtures and a marble counter that looked untouched. The bedroom held a queen-sized bed covered in dove gray linens, and the ensuite bath had a soaking tub, rainfall shower, and heated floors. I'd lived in hotels with less luxury. I stepped back toward the hallway, dazed. "This is just for me?" "Only you," Mrs. Antonelli replied. "Everything you need has been provided. Additional wardrobe in the closet, toiletries in the cabinet, emergency numbers preloaded into the tablet on your nightstand. Breakfast is served at 7. Chiara wakes at 6:30. Chiara. That name had hung in the air during the entire interview but hadn't yet become real. The little girl I was supposed to look after hadn't made an appearance, and I found that odd, especially for a father who claimed to be so involved. That night, I unpacked the one suitcase I'd brought and found a row of tailored outfits already hanging in the wardrobe, all my size. I didn't remember providing measurements, but somehow they knew. I slept badly, too aware of the silence and the shadows and the fact that I was being watched. The next morning, Mrs. Antonelli knocked once before entering without waiting. "Chiara is awake. It's time." Her tone was impersonal, but not unkind. She led me down a hallway painted in soft lavender, the walls hung with children's art in expensive gold frames. The door to Chiara's room was already open, and I stepped in slowly, not wanting to startle her. The space was what you'd expect for a child living in a Manhattan mansion: pastel canopy bed, stuffed animals, more books than a library, and a dollhouse that was probably worth more than my car. Chiara Greco sat on the carpet with a block tower half-built and an expression that belonged on someone twice her age. She looked up at me with bright, wary eyes and didn't say a word. Her hair was a tumble of chocolate curls pinned to one side with a pink clip, and her dress, ruffled and lace-trimmed, looked picked out by someone who didn't understand 5-year-olds. I crouched slowly, offering a smile. "Hi, Chiara. I'm Lena. I'll be helping out for a while." Without blinking, she threw a wooden block at my head. It hit me just above the eyebrow, not hard enough to bruise, but enough to make a point. I didn't react. I didn't scold. I just calmly picked up the block and set it back on the pile beside her. "That's okay," I said softly. "I'd be mad too if someone new showed up in my space." Her brow furrowed slightly. I saw the confusion in her expression, the brief break in the wall she'd clearly been taught to keep up. "Where's Maria?" she asked after a pause. "I'm not Maria," I said gently. "But I'd like to be your friend." She didn't answer, but she didn't throw another block either. The rest of the day unfolded like clockwork, because it was literally on a clock. The child's schedule had 15-minute increments, down to when she was allowed to snack, nap, and use her tablet. Educational games at 10 o'clock, supervised reading at 10:45, silent playtime at 11 o'clock. It wasn't parenting. It was a military operation disguised as Montessori. But Chiara followed it without complaint. She wasn't wild or unruly, just guarded. Like someone had told her being soft was dangerous. I tried not to pry, tried to earn her trust one quiet moment at a time. During coloring, I noticed she only used dark colors. During reading, she chose books where the parents were absent. During nap time, she didn't sleep. At lunch, we ate in the solarium, a glass-walled room with sunlight streaming in and a silent staff member standing in the corner. Chiara poked at her food. I tried to get her to talk about her favorite shows or colors, but she stayed quiet until I mentioned I used to be a teacher. "Why'd you stop?" she asked. I swallowed. "Because grown-ups don't always tell the truth." She looked at me for a long beat, then said, "Neither do daddies." I didn't know what to say to that. Later that afternoon, while Chiara napped, or at least pretended to, I wandered the halls to get my bearings. Every door I passed had a camera tucked discreetly into the ceiling corner. One hallway had a keypad outside the door. Another had a silent man in a black suit standing motionless beside a window. When I passed by the kitchen, I overheard 2 staff members talking in hushed tones. "You see the new nanny?" one asked. "She's brave. She won't last. She already made it past the interview." "That's more than the last one." They didn't notice me, or maybe they didn't care. Back in my suite, I tried to shake off the unease creeping down my spine. I wasn't just in a wealthy household. I was in a compound. Security wasn't just for privacy, it was protection from something worse. Something that had already happened, or something they knew would happen again. That evening, Mrs. Antonelli summoned me for a debrief in Attilio's office. He stood behind the desk again, arms crossed, jacket gone, sleeves rolled back over inked forearms that seemed like a warning more than decoration. "How did she respond to you?" "She tested me," I said plainly. But she didn't flinch when I passed the test. His lips twitched. Not a smile, but something close. "Good. She needs someone who won't back down." "I'm not here to fix her," I added. "Just to show her she's not alone." He looked at me for a long, silent moment, then nodded once. "That will do, Miss Petrova. You're dismissed." I returned to my suite and finally let my shoulders drop. My nerves felt like electric wires, overstimulated from the tightrope I'd been walking all day. I showered, changed into sleep clothes, and curled into bed, the duvet soft as clouds and the sheets smelling faintly of lavender and linen. But sleep didn't come easily. Not in a place where secrets crept behind carved doors and cameras watched from behind ornamental moldings. At 2:07 a.m., I opened my eyes to a red dot moving silently across my ceiling. It hovered for a second, then blinked twice, then vanished. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I simply pulled the covers tighter and whispered aloud to the empty room, "What the hell did I just sign up for?" The red laser dot didn't let me sleep, not really, but by morning I'd convinced myself it was some kind of automated security check. When I went to wake Chiara, she was already sitting cross-legged on the rug, building a lopsided tower with expressionless focus. She didn't look at me, didn't greet me, didn't even pretend to tolerate my presence. She simply continued stacking blocks like I wasn't real. "Good morning," I tried, but she responded by knocking the entire tower over with one swipe of her tiny hand. Then, without missing a beat, she muttered, "They always leave." I froze because it wasn't whining, wasn't manipulation, it was cold, adult truth spoken in a 5-year-old's voice. She didn't look up as she pushed past me toward her closet, choosing clothes in a flurry of mismatched chaos. Pink tights, a denim jumper, a yellow t-shirt with a peeling unicorn print, none of it made sense together. "You can't wear that," she said flatly before I could speak, waiting for the correction she clearly expected. Instead, I crouched beside her and smiled lightly. "You can wear whatever you feel good in." She paused as though the concept was foreign, her little brows knitting together in a suspicious squint. "Maria used to make me change." I shrugged gently and said, "Well, I'm not Maria," and something in her expression softened. Not much, but enough that I saw the tiniest crack in her defenses. She stepped closer, almost shy, and grabbed my sleeve before letting go quickly as if she'd broken a rule. "Fine. But we're late," she huffed, her voice wobbling just barely. Breakfast was another test, a silent room, a silent chef, and Chiara swinging her legs beneath the chair like she was waiting for a trap to spring. She didn't eat right away, only stared at me over her bowl of oatmeal with narrowed eyes, daring me to tell her what to do. When I didn't, she finally took a bite, cheeks puffing suspiciously as though she expected the oatmeal to betray her too. "You're weird," she announced after swallowing, and I almost laughed. "Good weird or bad weird?" I asked, and she answered with a shrug, progress. Throughout the morning, she continued poking and testing me, an endless parade of small rebellions disguised as independence. During coloring, she snapped every crayon in half just to watch my reaction, and I calmly swept the pieces into a pile without scolding her. During reading time, she closed the book every time I opened it, so I simply waited until she opened it again herself. At snack time, she tried negotiating for candy, and I counteroffered with yogurt and a choice of granola flavors. Slowly, the tightness around her small shoulders began to loosen. It was during finger painting that I heard something rare, Chiara's genuine laughter. She dipped both hands into a swirl of pink and yellow paint, then smeared them across the paper like a tiny hurricane of color. When I leaned in to add my own paint streak, she gave me a conspiratorial grin that warmed something deep in my chest. And when a soft sound at the doorway made her glance up, I turned to find Attilio Greco standing there silently. For a fleeting second, I saw the smallest smile tug at the corner of his mouth before he stepped back into the hallway, vanishing as quickly as he'd appeared. The rest of the afternoon moved more smoothly, with Chiara tolerating my presence instead of challenging it relentlessly. She let me braid her hair, messily, but she didn't fight it, and she even asked if I could read her another story later. Maybe, I teased, and she rolled her eyes with theatrical annoyance that looked more like comfort. I'd started recognizing the patterns, the way she needed choices, not commands, and softness, not force. She was a child trying to survive in a world built with too many sharp edges. During outdoor playtime, I noticed several men stationed subtly around the garden, their positions too perfect to be coincidence. Chiara ignored them entirely, chasing butterflies and pretending not to watch for approval from the corner of her eye. I cheered every small victory, every laugh, every moment she didn't retreat. The staff called the place the fortress, and for the first time I understood why. Safety surrounded us, but so did something else, danger held at bay by the thinnest of lines. At dinner, Chiara sat beside me instead of across the table, an unspoken shift that Mrs. Antonelli noticed, but didn't comment on. Attilio joined us late, sleeves rolled back, tattoos peeking from beneath his shirt cuffs like restless shadows. He didn't speak much, but he watched Chiara carefully whenever she looked away, his gaze threading between softness and something harder. At one point, he asked her how her day was, and Chiara hesitated before glancing at me. "Okay," she murmured, and I felt an unexpected swell of pride. After dinner, Chiara insisted I tuck her into bed, though she tried to mask the request as a demand. "Don't read the boring book," she said, crawling under her velvet comforter. "Read the one with the fox that bites people." I laughed softly, choosing a gentler story instead, and though she pretended to protest, she fell asleep before I reached the third page. I watched her for a moment, amazed at how much she had let me in within a single day. Then I gently slipped out of her room, thinking the night was over. It wasn't. Hours later, long after the rest of the house had quieted and I'd retreated to my suite, I heard something faint, a soft, dragging shuffle in the hallway. At first, I thought it was one of the guards, but the sound was too small, too uneven, too sleepy. When I opened my door, Chiara stood barefoot in the dim corridor, eyes half closed, her pink hair clip hanging loose. She was sleepwalking, arms limp at her sides, face pale as moonlight. I followed carefully, not touching her, remembering that waking a child in this state could be dangerous. She moved with unsettling precision, step after step, heading toward the end of the hall. Then she reached the corner, turned toward the service staircase, and quietly descended. The air grew colder the farther we went, the walls narrower, and her breathing more strained. At the base of the stairs, she murmured something in Italian, soft, broken, and terrified. "Non lasciare che l'uomo mi riprenda." "Don't let the man take me again." My heart froze as the words slipped into the silence like a ghost. What do you think Chiara meant when she whispered that chilling line? Was it a memory, a fear, or something darker waiting in the shadows? Share your theories in the comments. I'd love to know what you think is really happening in the Greco household. Chiara didn't remember anything about the night before, or at least, she pretended not to. Over breakfast, she talked about pancakes and butterflies, not sleepwalking or strange men in dreams. I kept watching her for signs, little clues that the words she'd whispered, "Don't let the man take me again," meant something deeper than a child's nightmare. But her eyes were clear, her voice steady, and Mrs. Antonelli made no mention of the night's events. Maybe this wasn't the first time. Afterward, I found myself wandering the halls again during Chiara's afternoon nap, needing movement to settle the nerves crawling just beneath my skin. I turned corners I hadn't turned before, found rooms that looked like they belonged in old European estates, parlors with dustless bookshelves, and halls where chandeliers dripped crystal like icicles. I paused at a heavy oak door with a brass plaque that read "Private," the only door I hadn't seen opened. Something about it felt like a dare. As I stepped closer, I didn't hear anyone, but I suddenly felt someone. "You're not allowed in there," Mrs. Antonelli's voice snapped from behind me, sharper than usual. I turned, startled. She stood at the end of the corridor with her arms crossed and a rare crack in her usual calm. That's Mr. Greco's private study. Do not enter unless summoned. She didn't wait for a reply, just turned and walked away, her heels echoing like a warning down the polished floor. The fourth floor was another forbidden zone, and I understood why. Cameras followed you there, every inch of the walls armed with security measures I couldn't name. One night, I'd caught a glimpse of men walking into a room with Attilio. Some looked like politicians, others like they belonged behind bars. Whatever business happened on that floor wasn't meant for someone like me. But curiosity is a patient thing, and mine had been quietly growing. A few days later, while Chiara napped and the house quieted into that eerie mid-afternoon hush, I followed a narrow hallway I hadn't seen before. It curved behind the kitchen and disappeared behind a paneled wall that looked like decorative molding. At the end was what I thought was a closet door, until I noticed the faint glow of a keypad just beneath the handle. Before I could step away, it clicked open. Empty. And behind it, a small elevator. I shouldn't have entered. I knew I shouldn't. But something about the silence, the draw of answers just beyond reach, pulled me in. I stepped inside, pressed the only button available, one with no number, just the symbol of a triangle pointing downward. The door closed with a soft sigh, and the elevator descended. The air cooled as we dropped. My stomach turned when we stopped, not at a sublevel, but what felt like a sub-basement, concrete, metal, silence. The door slid open into a narrow corridor lined with steel walls and LED strip lighting. At the end, a single reinforced door stood waiting, its frame thick enough to stop a tank. I hesitated for just a second before pushing it open. Inside was a room built for a nightmare. There were 2 military-grade cots with wool blankets, metal cabinets stocked with emergency rations, water, and medical kits. A ventilation system purred quietly overhead. In the corner, a tall black cabinet with a fingerprint scanner pulsed with a red light locked, but I didn't need to guess what was inside. Weapons. Lots of them. On the far wall, a screen embedded into the concrete flickered to life. Rows of camera feeds streamed silently hallways, gates, driveways, perimeter views. This wasn't just a panic room. It was a war room. A last resort. And it had Chiara's name written all over it. I backed away, suddenly aware of how deeply I'd trespassed into a world that wasn't mine. As I stepped back into the elevator, I pressed the button again and said nothing for the rest of the day. When I put Chiara to bed that night, she asked if I'd ever been in a castle before. Once, I whispered, but it didn't feel like one. She didn't ask what I meant. Dinner was quieter than usual that evening. Attilio sat at the head of the table, dressed in black, scrolling through his phone with an unreadable expression. Chiara chattered about how she wanted to be a storm chaser when she grew up, and I pretended everything was normal. The staff moved silently behind us, clearing dishes with precision that felt choreographed. Then, just as the dessert was being served, an alarm blared, short, sharp, and high-pitched. Everything changed in an instant. Attilio stood so fast his chair fell backward. "Secure the perimeter," he barked, already moving. Men appeared from nowhere, at least 6 in the dining room alone, guns drawn, expressions grim. "Lena. Chiara. Go with Mrs. Antonelli. Now." He didn't wait to see if I followed. Mrs. Antonelli grabbed my arm with surprising force and led us through a hallway I hadn't used before. Chiara clung to my side, her small fingers trembling in mine. We reached the panel with the elevator. Mrs. Antonelli punched in a code, the door opened, and we descended into the underworld I'd already visited in secret. This time, it didn't feel like trespassing. It felt like survival. Inside the safe room, Mrs. Antonelli locked the door and engaged 3 separate manual bolts. The lights dimmed automatically to reduce visibility from thermal scans, and the screen on the wall lit up again, showing the house above, movement on the cameras, shadows in the halls. Chiara whimpered and clutched me tighter. "Is it the man?" she whispered. "The one from before?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered back, brushing her curls from her damp forehead. "But we're safe in here. I promise." We stayed like that for over an hour. The screen showed flashes of movement, some familiar, some not. Gunfire echoed faintly, muted by the reinforced walls, but still present, still real. I held Chiara close, breathing through the adrenaline, aware of how utterly helpless I was if anything went wrong. Mrs. Antonelli sat near the cabinet, her hand resting on what I now realized was a concealed weapon holster beneath her coat. Everyone in this house had secrets, and some of them were armed. Eventually, the screen shifted, less movement now. The sounds above faded into eerie stillness. Then the elevator activated. One soft chime. One breathless moment. The door opened. Attilio stood there, blood on his hands, his collar torn, a rip along the side of his jacket. He stepped into the room slowly, eyes locking on Chiara first, then on me. "It's over," he said, voice rough. "You're safe." I stood, still holding Chiara, heart thundering in my ears. What happened? A breach. 2 men inside the gate. Gone now. He didn't explain further. Chiara ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, staining her pajamas with blood he hadn't had time to wash off. He didn't flinch. Just dropped to one knee and held her tightly. "You're all right, Tesoro. You're okay." Mrs. Antonelli began resetting the security system. I stared at Attilio, the weight of what I'd seen finally sinking in. This wasn't the echo of a dangerous world. This was the world. And I had chosen to step into it. I met Attilio's gaze as he stood, Chiara now dozing against his shoulder. "How often does this happen?" I asked softly. He exhaled. "Often enough that I built this room. Rarely enough that it still matters." He glanced toward the weapons cabinet, then back to me. "This is why I don't do background checks, Lena." He moved closer, voice low. "I do background control." The morning after the breach, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Sunlight filtered into the solarium as if it hadn't been replaced with gunfire and fear only hours before. Chiara sat at the table eating toast like a child who hadn't spent part of the night locked in a panic room. Mrs. Antonelli moved through the kitchen with the same silent precision, but her gaze lingered longer on the windows now. And I couldn't unsee the blood on Attilio Greco's hands. He hadn't flinched when Chiara pressed her small body into his chest, smearing red across her pajamas. He hadn't looked shocked or shaken. He'd looked prepared. And that terrified me more than anything. Because what kind of life prepared you for that? I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know where I was or what I'd stepped into. I'd seen the weapons, the guards, the safe room built like a bunker, but I'd also seen the little girl who needed me. That was the thing about truth. Once it's exposed, it demands attention. And I'd had enough of pretending. So that evening, after Chiara went to bed, I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor and opened the door I wasn't supposed to. Attilio was inside, seated at a massive black desk, sleeves rolled to his forearms again, tattoos visible like they were part of his armor. A crystal glass of something dark and burning sat beside his laptop. He looked up the second I stepped in, as if he'd been expecting me. "Miss Petrova," he said smoothly, but I shook my head. "Lena," I corrected. "We're way past formalities, aren't we?" He watched me silently, weighing the temperature of the room. "I want the truth," I said. "All of it. No more shadows, no more cryptic comments. What am I doing in this house, and who exactly are you?" He stood, slowly, like a man who knew he wasn't about to win an argument, but had no interest in losing his temper either. "You're taking care of my daughter," he said evenly. "That hasn't changed." "You built a war bunker under your home," I shot back. "There are guards with earpieces, security layers thicker than a consulate, and last night I watched you walk in covered in blood and tell me it was handled. You don't get to pretend this is normal anymore." My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. Attilio walked around the desk and leaned against it, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I don't pretend," he said after a beat. "I protect. That's what this house is. That's what I am. And yes, you deserve the truth, because you're in it now." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a black folder, placing it on the desk between us. "This is the real job description," he said. "No fluff, no interviews, no polite fiction." He opened it slowly, revealing pages of photographs, maps, and dossiers. Faces I didn't recognize. Locations I couldn't pronounce. He pointed to one document near the top. "These are the 5 families that control most of the Eastern Corridor: money, arms, contracts, protection." Another page. "These are the ones trying to take that control. They'd kill to get it." His eyes flicked to me. Some already have. And you? I asked, my voice quieter now. You're what? One of the 5. He nodded once. Greco Syndicate. Founded by my grandfather, passed down to my father, now mine. We run ports, security, import, enforcement. We avoid attention and keep peace where the government won't. I'm not a good man, Lena. But I am a loyal one. I didn't know what to say. The words syndicate and enforcement rattled inside my head like broken glass in a jar. And Chiara? I finally asked. Does she know? His eyes darkened. She knows I'm strict. That we have rules. That we stay safe. But she doesn't know this life. And I'll do whatever it takes to keep it that way. I stared at the files, then at him, then down at my own shaking hands. And me? I whispered. What am I now? You're under my protection, he said without hesitation. Which means you're covered. Watched. And yes, targeted, possibly. That's why I needed to know you were worth the risk. My breath hitched. So this was never about childcare. No, he said quietly. But it became about Chiara. And now, it's also about you. He walked closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, smoke and citrus, and something older, more dangerous. You can walk away, he said, voice low. Tonight. No strings. No threats. I'll even give you a new name and enough money to disappear. And if I stay, you become part of this world. You don't ask more questions. You follow my rules. And you understand that trust is a dangerous currency in my line of work. I should have answered. I should have said no, said yes, said something. But I didn't. I turned, walked out of the office, and didn't stop until I was back in the hallway outside Chiara's room. Inside, she was still asleep, curled around her stuffed rabbit, lashes fluttering as she dreamed. I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a stray curl from her face. She stirred, but didn't wake, mumbling something about unicorns and pancakes. And I leaned down, whispering the only thing I knew with certainty. I'm not going anywhere. If you uncovered this kind of truth about someone you'd grown to care for, would you stay, or would you run? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're hooked like I am, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next twist in Lena's story. Weeks passed after the night Attilio laid everything bare, and nothing was quite the same, but somehow, it all functioned like it always had. I still read stories to Chiara before bed, still packed her favorite snacks, still braided her hair in uneven plaits that made her giggle. But there was a current now, subtle but charged, running between me and her father, an awareness that words had been said and choices deferred. He kept his distance, not cold but careful, the way someone does when they know the next move might change everything. And I stayed, because every day with Chiara made the idea of leaving feel more like abandoning something I'd already come to love. Chiara had warmed to me in ways I hadn't expected, clingy in the mornings, chatty at night, testing fewer boundaries and asking more questions. Why don't you have a daughter? She asked me one afternoon, frowning as I helped her put glitter glue on construction paper. Maybe someday, I said, brushing hair from her eyes. If I'm lucky. She tilted her head and studied me like she was measuring that luck herself. Attilio noticed the change too. He didn't say much, but when he watched us, there was a softness in his expression that hadn't been there before, like he was seeing a version of his daughter he'd feared might never return. I caught him lingering at doorways more often, listening without interrupting, sometimes cracking a rare smile when Chiara ran up to show off her drawings. But he still wore secrets like a second skin. I didn't ask questions anymore, not because I wasn't curious, but because I knew the answers came with consequences. And yet, I couldn't stop wondering what would happen if the peace shattered again. That answer came on a Saturday in Central Park. We'd taken Chiara out for a picnic, something normal, something light. 2 of Attilio's guards followed discreetly, posing as passers-by in designer jackets and mirrored sunglasses. Chiara ran ahead, shrieking with joy as pigeons scattered and the wind lifted her curls like a banner of freedom. I laughed from the bench as I watched her leap from rock to rock, pretending she was a princess escaping a tower. That was when I saw him. He appeared too casually, slim-build, tailored coat, sunglasses too dark for the day's mild sun. He didn't approach quickly, just paced with slow, intentional steps until he was close enough to be noticed by Chiara. Bella, he called out in a low, syrupy voice that made every hair on my neck stand upright. Don't you remember me? I'm your uncle. Chiara froze, her foot halfway up a rock. The guards stiffened, hands moving toward their waists, subtle but practiced. I didn't wait for a signal, I just moved. Chiara, I called sharply. Come here. Now. My voice cut through the air like a whip, and she obeyed immediately, her eyes wide and uncertain. The man didn't flinch as I stepped between him and Chiara, putting my body in front of hers. You need to leave, I said, my voice low but firm. Now. I'm family, he said with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. She has a right to know, she has a right to be safe, I snapped. One of the guards stepped in beside me, placing a firm hand on the man's chest and muttering something into a comm clipped inside his jacket. The man raised his hands slowly, still smiling, still dangerous. This isn't over, he murmured as they led him away. Tell her father. I don't need to tell him, I said, staring him down. He'll already know. Chiara clung to me on the ride back, her hands gripping the hem of my coat with silent intensity. I held her tight, murmuring that she was okay, that nothing would happen to her, that I would never let anyone take her. But inside, I was shaking. Because that hadn't been a chance encounter. That had been a message. The moment we stepped inside the house, Attilio was waiting. He stood by the front staircase, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his phone still in hand. One look at Chiara and me, at the panic still in our eyes, and he dismissed the guards without a word. What happened? He asked, voice dangerously low. I opened my mouth, but Chiara beat me to it. A man said he was my uncle, she whispered. But he wasn't nice. Attilio's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping just below the surface. He turned to me. You recognized it for what it was? A probe, I said quietly. Testing the perimeter. Our response time. His eyes locked on mine. What did you do? I got her out, I said. Triggered protocol. Stayed between him and her until security handled it. Attilio didn't say thank you. Instead, he walked across the room, picked up a decanter of dark liquor, and poured a splash into a glass with hands that trembled only slightly. If they'd taken her, he said, staring into the drink, I would have burned the city down. He said it with terrifying calm, no heat, no bluster. Just the promise of it. That night, I stood outside his office door longer than I should have. The guards let me pass without question now. The household accepted me as part of the protected inner circle, even if no one had said it aloud. When I finally knocked and stepped in, Attilio was alone, sitting near the fireplace with a book he hadn't touched. The air smelled like scotch and cold ash. He looked up as I entered, and something in his eyes softened. She was brave today, he said. But she shouldn't have had to be. No, I agreed, closing the door behind me. She shouldn't. He gestured to the chair across from him, and I took it without hesitation. For a moment, we said nothing. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at me like he was trying to read something buried beneath my skin. You saved her, he said. She's not just your daughter anymore, I replied. She's mine too. The silence that followed that sentence was heavy. Charged. Dangerous. You know what I'm going to say next, he said. Yes, I whispered. You can walk away, he said again. I'll still protect you. Set you up anywhere. You'll never have to worry, but you don't want me to, I replied. No, he admitted. I don't. He stood, slowly, walked around the space between us, and stopped in front of my chair. You're not staff anymore, Lena. You haven't been for a long time. His voice dropped lower. So choose. Stay, knowing what it means. Or walk away before it's too late to pretend this was ever just a job. I stood. The air between us crackled. And when I kissed him, it wasn't soft or tentative. It was electric. It was a collision. It was a promise. The scream tore through the silence like a blade. I bolted upright in bed, heart racing, before realizing the sound hadn't come from a dream. It was real, raw, and coming from Chiara's room. I didn't wait. I was down the hallway in seconds, bursting through her door to find her tangled in blankets, eyes shut tight, sobbing something over and over in a language I barely understood. Non lasciarmi. Non lasciarmi, mama. My breath caught as I crossed the room. She was drenched in sweat, her tiny fists clawing at the air, her cries fragmented and panicked. I knelt beside her and gently pulled her into my arms, cradling her the way I imagined her mother once had. Her sobs quieted only when I began humming, not a lullaby she knew, but one my own mother had sung to me on nights I couldn't sleep. A slow, mournful Russian tune, soft enough to blend with the sound of her breathing. Chiara's body trembled, then slowly stilled. "Mama," she whispered again, this time clearer, as if she were somewhere between sleep and waking. My eyes stung, but I didn't correct her, I just tightened my hold. She needed comfort, not clarity. So I stayed there on the floor with her wrapped against my chest, humming lullabies until the sky began to lighten outside her window. I didn't move, not even when I realized someone was watching. Attilio stood in the doorway, barefoot, a black t-shirt clinging to his frame, arms folded tightly across his chest. He didn't speak, but something in his expression cracked, just a flicker, like he wasn't prepared to see his daughter clinging to another woman and calling her by a name that no longer belonged to the living. But he didn't look jealous. He looked like a man watching the impossible unfold and not sure if he should feel relief or grief. And then, with the same quiet he always moved with, he turned and disappeared down the hall. I stayed with Chiara until the morning routine called her awake. By then, she was back to herself, sleepy, cranky, unaware of the weight her dreams had placed on my heart. She didn't remember what she'd said, or maybe she just didn't want to. I didn't ask. Some things deserve to stay safe inside silence. Later that day, Attilio found me in the library sorting through children's books we were donating to a local shelter. He didn't speak right away, just stood there for a moment watching me from across the room. "You stayed with her," he said finally. I turned, unsure how to respond. "She called me Mama," I said softly. "I know," he replied. "She hasn't said that word out loud in 2 years." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I didn't correct her, I admitted. "Good," he said. She needed to feel safe more than she needed the truth. I nodded, unsure what to say, until his hand brushed mine as I passed him a box of books. It lingered for a second longer than it should have, warm, calloused, sure. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now, for giving her back a piece of something I thought was gone. That night, I didn't return to my suite. Dinner ended late. Chiara dozed off in the living room, and somewhere between helping Mrs. Antonelli clear the dishes and passing by the second-floor landing, I found myself outside his door. It was open. So was the invitation. I didn't need words, just a glance. We didn't speak much that night. He poured me a glass of wine, then watched me drink it in silence as we sat by the fire. I asked him about a school we'd been considering for Chiara, and for the first time, he let me in on the decision-making, showing me files, teacher backgrounds, even security protocols. "She needs structure," he said. "But she needs softness, too." I didn't say it, but I knew he meant me. When I finally stood to leave, he reached for my hand. "Stay," he said. I didn't hesitate. The bed was larger than I'd imagined, soft, dark sheets, the kind that made you feel weightless. He didn't touch me that night, not in any way that crossed a line. He just lay beside me, quiet, breathing, warm. It was the safest I'd felt in years. And the most dangerous. In the weeks that followed, we slipped into something unspoken. He still moved like a man who could kill before breakfast and be in a tailored suit by lunch. But when he looked at me, something shifted. We shared coffee in the mornings. He let me vet new staff before they were hired. I became, quietly, more than just Chiara's nanny. She began calling me Lena Mama. At first, it was a game, half teasing, half hopeful. Then it became routine. The staff picked it up. Even Attilio said it once when he thought I wasn't listening. It didn't scare me. It felt earned. But safety, I was learning, was a fragile illusion. One night, after I put Chiara to bed, I returned to Attilio's room. He was still in meetings, so I changed into one of the soft robes he'd bought me, tucked myself under the blankets, and closed my eyes. The house was quiet. Still. Too still. When I woke in the middle of the night, it wasn't to a sound, it was to a feeling. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier, colder, like the moment before a storm breaks. I sat up slowly, brushing my hand along the pillow beside me, only to freeze as my fingers grazed something hard. Small. Cold. I turned on the lamp and stared. It was a single bullet casing, lying dead center on my pillow. A message. A warning. And not one I could afford to ignore. The bullet casing on my pillow should have been the warning I listened to, but life in the Greco house had a way of convincing you to normalize the impossible. For days, I carried it in my pocket like a talisman I didn't understand, running my thumb over its smooth edge every time a shadow moved wrong. I didn't tell Attilio, not because I didn't trust him, but because he already carried enough weight on his shoulders to crumble a lesser man. And somewhere in my gut, a cold whisper told me the threat hadn't come from the outside at all. It had come from within. Everything shifted the following week, subtle at first like hairline cracks forming in marble. A guard who always smiled at Chiara no longer made eye contact. A maid who sang while she worked suddenly kept her head down. Even Mrs. Antonelli, normally unshakable, started locking doors twice and checking them again. Something in the house tightened like a fist curling inward, and though no one said it aloud, I felt it in every step. The Greco Syndicate was bleeding from the inside. The day it happened started like any other. I took Chiara to the playroom after breakfast and watched her arrange her stuffed animals in a neat little row, narrating a story in Italian under her breath. A new guard, shorter, unfamiliar, stiff, stood near the door, assigned to us without explanation. I didn't like how he watched the windows more than the exits, or how he kept adjusting something beneath his jacket. But I reminded myself that paranoia had become a second language here. It turned out I hadn't learned enough. When the knock sounded at the playroom door, I assumed it was Mrs. Antonelli coming to check in. Chiara looked up, waiting for the familiar voice, but instead, the door swung open to reveal two men I'd never seen before. They weren't in suits or uniforms, just dark jackets, hard expressions, and something cold in their eyes. The new guard stepped aside like he had been expecting them. My stomach dropped. "Take the girl," the taller one said in accented English. I grabbed Chiara instantly, pulling her behind me as she clutched my shirt with trembling fingers. My mind raced, running through every protocol I'd memorized, but this wasn't a drill. This was already breaking every rule. "You don't want to do this," I said, trying to steady my voice, but the men moved forward without hesitation. Chiara whimpered, and I felt her grip tighten. Then the shorter man stepped closer, and everything went black. When I came to, the world was white. White ceiling. White sheets. White curtains drifting from a soft breeze. A rhythmic beeping pulsed at my left, slow and steady. My eyelids felt heavy, and my head ached like someone had poured fog into my skull. I wasn't home. I was in a hospital. Panic surged through me the moment memory hit Chiara, the men, the guards stepping aside, and I tried to sit up, only for pain to shoot down my spine. A hand pressed gently to my shoulder before I could move again. "Easy, Lena," a voice murmured, raw and low. "You're safe." Attilio sat beside the bed, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. I had never seen him like that. Not the night of the breach. Not in the safe room. Not even when Chiara called for a mother she no longer had. His shoulders shook once, barely, before he lifted his head, revealing eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "I got her back," he whispered, voice hoarse. "But you almost didn't make it." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. "What happened?" I croaked finally, and the question tasted like fear. "Someone inside my circle sold information," he said, each word clipped. "A splinter faction. They planned it for weeks." His jaw tightened as he looked at the wall instead of me. "They thought taking Chiara would force my hand." My heart pounded painfully against my ribs. "But you stopped them," I whispered. "Yes," he said. "But not before they drugged you. Not before they got her out of the house." He paused, swallowing hard. "Not before you were almost." He didn't finish the sentence. I closed my eyes, tears burning behind them. "Is she okay?" "Yes," he answered, and for the first time since waking, his voice softened. "They didn't hurt her. She's frightened, but she's home." He inhaled deeply. "Because of you." "Me?" I croaked. When they grabbed you, you held onto her so tightly she scratched one of the men trying to pry her from your arms, he said. She told me. His voice broke again, just enough to crack through my fog. You fought for her. I didn't feel like I had fought. I felt like I had failed. As the medication in my system loosened its grip, bits of the event came back in fragments: Chiara's scream, the gloved hand on my wrist, the jab of something cold against my neck. They used the guard, I said weakly. He let them in. He's dead, Attilio said. I opened my eyes and met his. And the others? Gone, he said. All of them. The room felt colder, even under the warm hospital blankets. This was the cost of secrets. This was the currency of the syndicate. This was the world Chiara lived in, and the one I was now tied to in ways I couldn't escape. Attilio leaned back, rubbing both hands over his face. I've spent days cleaning up the betrayal, he said. But there's something different now. Something I can't undo. His eyes found mine. I can't protect her from everything, no matter how hard I try. His voice cracked on the last word, a sound I'd never heard from him before. I reached for his hand without thinking. He startled slightly, then let his fingers twine with mine, his grip firm but shaking. Lena, he said, voice barely above a breath, you almost died. The weight of the words pressed down on us both. And I can't lose you too. The room went still. Silent. Suffocating. The walls weren't white anymore, they were closing in. I swallowed hard. Attilio, I whispered. This life, this danger, this constant fear. My voice trembled. Is this the life you want for her? His breath caught in his throat. He didn't answer. He couldn't. And the silence between us said everything. What do you think Attilio should choose, his empire or a safer life for the daughter he loves? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you're ready to see what Attilio decides next. Attilio didn't answer me that night in the hospital, not with words, at least, but his silence clung to us like smoke. After I was discharged, things moved quickly, almost too quickly, as if a switch had flipped inside him. He was quieter, colder in business meetings, more tactile at home, like he was holding on before something inevitable slipped through his fingers. I didn't push. I waited. The answer came 3 nights later, in the study, where he found me staring at the bullet casing I'd finally left on his desk. He didn't speak at first, just stood there in a black sweater, his hands behind his back, expression unreadable. I've made a decision, he said quietly. I'm going to give it all away. My heart skipped a beat. Give away what? I asked, though part of me already knew. The syndicate, he said. The power, the operations, the title. Everything. He walked to the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline like it had personally betrayed him. I have a cousin in Milan, Cristiano. He's ambitious, and he's loyal in the only way that matters, through blood. My breath caught in my throat. You're serious. Attilio turned to me, eyes dark and certain. I would rather burn everything I've built than bury another person I love. This isn't a life for Chiara, not anymore. Not after what happened to you. His voice dropped. Not after they touched her. He laid out the plan with clinical precision, the way a surgeon might explain a high-risk procedure. We would disappear, no press, no announcement, no explanation. First, a body double, already procured, would stand in for him at a staged shootout outside the city. The townhouse would be set on fire with enough evidence planted to suggest we had all died in the blast. Fingerprints. Fabric scraps. Even a strand of my hair. I'll handle everything, he said. All you have to do is say yes. I thought about Chiara's nightmares, the way she called for her mother in sleep, the panic in her eyes that day at the park. I thought about the bullet casing on my pillow. And the way Attilio had looked at me in the hospital, broken open like a wound. If you're sure, I said softly, and if this really is for her, not just for me, then yes. I'm in. There was no turning back after that. For the next week, the townhouse became a hive of whispers and orchestrated exits. Chiara was told we were taking a long vacation, that her papa needed a break from work, and she believed us, maybe because she wanted to, or maybe because she trusted us that much. We packed only the essentials: documents, cash, photos, the stuffed rabbit she slept with every night. I said goodbye to my room, my wardrobe, the tiny coffee mug I always used. None of it would come with us. On the seventh night, we staged the fire. Attilio watched from a black SUV as the flames consumed the front facade of the townhouse, licking up the limestone like a hungry animal. Sirens screamed in the distance, but we were already gone 15 blocks away, disguised, driving toward a private airfield with our new passports in hand. In the back seat, Chiara slept with her head on my lap. I stroked her curls and tried not to cry. There was no funeral for the life we left behind, only smoke and silence. The car arrived at the hangar just before midnight. A private jet waited on the tarmac, its interior already stocked with food, toys, documents under fake names, Luca and Elena Vitali, and their daughter, Sofia. I read the names over and over like a script I didn't want to forget. Luca kissed me once before we boarded, not the Attilio kiss I knew, but one filtered through adrenaline and grief. I squeezed his hand back, our entire past compressed into the moment we stepped inside. We buckled Chiara into her seat between us. The engines whirred, loud and final, a sound like erasing history. As the plane lifted off the runway, I looked out the window and whispered goodbye to the city that had broken and rebuilt me. Beside me, Chiara stirred in her sleep, her tiny fingers reaching blindly for mine. I held them tight, the only thing I had left to hold on to. Somewhere below, the smoke still rose. But up here, in the quiet hum of exile, we had finally become ghosts. 6 months after the fire, the world called us by new names. We lived in a small stone farmhouse tucked into the hills of Tuscany, surrounded by olive trees and rows of sun-warmed grapevines. Locals thought we were a quiet family from Florence, he, a retired finance man, and I, a translator who worked remotely. Chiara went by Sofia now, and she didn't correct anyone when they called her that. She smiled more, laughed louder, and finally slept through the night without calling for ghosts. The farmhouse was modest but perfect. Terracotta tiles warmed our feet in the morning, and the windows opened to birdsong and sun. Attilio, now Luca, rose early to walk the vineyard, sometimes with Chiara on his shoulders, teaching her how to prune vines with shears too big for her hands. I'd sit on the porch, legs curled beneath me, watching them with one hand on my stomach and the other wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. Peace was not something I trusted, but it was something I was slowly learning how to hold. We kept our pasts behind us, locked in a safe under the floorboards along with the old names and older weapons. Attilio hadn't touched a gun in months, but sometimes I'd catch his eyes scanning crowds in town, calculating exits out of habit. Mrs. Antonelli wrote once from a bakery in Milan, saying she was safe and well and would visit if it were ever truly safe again. We never answered. There were lines we couldn't cross, not for guilt, not for memory, not even for love. Chiara was the one who adjusted the quickest. She made friends with the farmer's daughter down the road and picked up the dialect like she'd been born into it. When strangers asked about her mother, she'd look at me without flinching and say, "She's right there," and I'd smile like the title had always belonged to me. Sometimes she would bring me wildflowers and press her ear to my growing belly and ask, "Will the baby know she's Italian or American or something else?" I told her she'll know she's ours. That's all that matters. Attilio and I were married in the garden under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The ceremony was just the three of us, a local judge, and 2 witnesses from town who didn't ask questions. Chiara wore a crown of daisies and pronounced herself the flower queen, insisting she should give me away and catch the bouquet. Attilio promised to love me in silence and storms, in safety and in fear, and I promised to stay even when shadows felt louder than sunlight. We wrote no vows, but lived them every day. And in that moment, as he slipped the ring on my finger, I finally let go of the life I thought I'd always wanted. But peace has its own ghosts. At night, when the moon cast silver over the fields, I'd sometimes wake to silence so deep it made me afraid to breathe. I'd reach for Attilio in bed, needing the press of his heartbeat against my spine just to remember we were still here, still whole. He'd pull me closer, always half awake, murmuring reassurances in Italian and English. I never asked if he still dreamed of the life he'd left behind. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But one night, as a storm rolled in over the hills and thunder pressed against the windows like an old debt collecting interest, I asked anyway. We were in the kitchen, candles flickering, Chiara asleep with her stuffed rabbit, and a night light glowing soft and yellow. I was chopping apples for a tart I'd probably burn, and he was watching me like he always did, quiet, present, still dangerous beneath all that calm. Do you miss it? I asked. The power. The empire. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set his glass down and walked to me slowly, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. His hands splayed across my stomach, feeling the small curve that marked the life we'd made. No, he said finally, his breath against my ear. Because this is the only empire I'll ever need. And in that moment, I believed him completely. The world outside could shift, twist, chase its own tail in fire and ruin, but inside this house, we had claimed something untouchable. Our daughter slept peacefully for the first time in years. Our unborn child kicked like a promise waiting to be born. And I, Lena Petrova, once a schoolteacher, once a runaway, once a nanny who clicked on the wrong job listing, had somehow become everything I never knew I needed to be. She applied for a nanny job online. She didn't expect to find a family worth burning her past for. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.